Hey, thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Kaylee, and this is Read Rant Review. I read a bunch of books, and then I give you a beat-by-beat, chapter-by-chapter breakdown of them. Today, we're continuing my Casual Classics series, where I go through and read classic books, and then I tell you all about it in a super casual, friendly, like bestie on FaceTime way. Today, we're going to be unpacking 1984 by George Orwell. This is a 368-page novel published in 1949. Currently on Goodreads, it's sitting at a 4.2 with over 5 million ratings. I have always heard of the book, right? You've always heard the term like Big Brother is watching, and you've seen the whole eye that's on the cover of a lot of the books. Really familiar with it. I know it gets referenced literally constantly, but I had never actually taken the time to read it for myself until just the other day. I think it is a phenomenal book. I think it is a very relevant book to today's society and political landscape, and I think it's something very important to be aware of, and to be aware of like these people from 70 years ago almost predicting the future in a really, really weird way. I find that a lot with Ray Bradbury's work, and I've covered a couple of his books, including Fahrenheit 451. And it always blows my mind every single time I do one of these classic reviews, and just how relevant they are. It's always so fascinating to me. And so I'm very excited to talk about this book today and to give you this rundown, and I don't know, maybe give you some food for thought. The biggest thing that I guess I would want for you to walk away from this video with is a like general understanding of what happens and kind of the overarching idea, so that you can go and read it for yourself and maybe have this as like a backdrop understanding, and you can experience it. Because although I will be giving you a bunch of quotes and I'll tell you kind of the general vibe of what's going on, it is so worth the read and the reflection and like the food for thought that comes out of it. So just keep that in mind. And that goes for like everything that's in this particular series. But with this book specifically, I think there's definitely a lot of reflection that can be done. I am by no means professional in any way, right? Like I don't have a background in English. I have a passion for it, and I have a passion for literature and, critical thinking just in general. Like it should be accessible to the masses. And I think even though we get out of, high school or college classes, English courses, right, where you read books and you dissect them, I think there's a lot of value to continue that even as you grow, be it in a book club or something like one of these videos where you don't just like consume something on autopilot. I know it's so fun to read books and turn your brain off. I know it's so fun and it's needed and whatever, and it's just like escapism for a lot of people. Trust. You see these romance books that I have on the shelf behind me, okay? But I think it's also really, really, really critically important that we continue to read books that challenge us and challenge the status quo and make us reflect on our, current lifestyle, or again, our like political beliefs, our socioeconomic like happenings in the world, and just like a bunch of stuff that you'll understand here in a minute. It's important to continue to consume material that makes you think about that and to have these sorts of discussions. And it gives you a platform to talk about these things and maybe view the world through a lens that you might not have had previously. With all of that being said, what an intro to one of these videos. I'm going to go ahead and read you the book description so that you know what we're getting into, and then we'll dive right in. A masterpiece of rebellion and imprisonment, where war is peace, freedom is slavery, and Big Brother is watching. Thought police, Big Brother, Orwellian. These words have entered our vocabulary because of George Orwell's classic dystopian novel, 1984. The story of one man's nightmare odyssey as he pursues a forbidden love affair through a world ruled by warring states and a power structure that controls not only information, but also individual thought and memory. 1984 is a prophetic, haunting tale, more relevant than ever before 1984 exposes the worst crimes imaginable, the destruction of truth, freedom, and individuality. Very, very crazy. I don't have my hardback with me. I only have the digital copy on my phone. I was going to read you book description on the back of that, because the book description on Goodreads is not very good, but that's okay. Hopefully maybe you get the general idea. It's just a dystopian novel. So let's dive right in. Chapter 1 opens with a man named Winston Smith. He's coming home from work. He lives in a place called the Victory Mansions, but it's actually these like really dingy, rundown apartments. And he's coming home after this really long day of work. He has ulcers on his legs. He's just beat to crap, exhausted, feeling terrible, making his way up the stairwell to his apartment. And on the stairwell, on like each of the landings, there's this giant sign. It was one of those pictures which are so contrived that the eyes follow you about when you move. Big Brother is watching you. The caption beneath it ran. He gets up into his room, or he gets up into his apartment rather, and the television is on. It's this giant television. It stays on 24/7. You can't turn it off, and it is just constantly like running information at you. And the general like belief is that anywhere that the TV can be seen, it can see you, and that it's constantly listening, right? Big Brother is always watching. And when he looks out the window of his apartment, in the far distance, a helicopter skimmed down between the roofs, hovered for an instant like a blue bottle, and darted away again with a curving flight. It was the police patrol, snooping into people's windows. The patrols did not matter, however. Only the thought police mattered. And we'll talk about the thought police here in like 1 second. But one thing to note before we begin too is this idea, and this obviously goes through the entirety of the book, of the concern of like Big Brother is watching, and that every move you make and every thought you have is somehow being tracked by the government. And like if you even think anti-government thoughts, that they'll like burst through your windows and like end your life. Nowadays, it's a little bit more believable, right? We have this constant belief, and it's not an incorrect belief, but we have this constant thing that like our phones are listening, our computers are listening. You get little covers for your webcam so that people can't like tune into that and like watch what's happening in your home. You get concerned about your Ring doorbells and your security systems being hacked and being watched. And you have all of the, the cameras on all the businesses and on the stoplights. And we just as a collective, in this like over the last like decade or so, have become so numb of kind of this expectation, and especially in more recent years with the more and more like viral popularity of things like TikTok and World Star, aging myself here, where you kind of expect every interaction that you have in public to be one that could potentially be recorded and shared across the world, and then everybody is watching you, and like every like movement and thing you say can somehow be filmed or recorded and like put on the internet, and it's out there forever, right? It's kind of this like inherent thing that we all have become numb to. But in 1949, when this was published, completely unheard of idea, completely like unfathomable idea that would be the norm. And so a lot of this like Orwellian state things that you may have heard, or the terminology there, has been more in reference to like surveillance. I don't know why that word feels incorrect in my mouth. We're gonna move on. That's gonna bother me so bad. Anyway, but like this idea of being watched. But more and more, other aspects of the book become relevant. Again, we'll unpack it. I don't want to sit here and like go on like a whole spiel, but just contextually, I just want you to keep that in mind, that the idea of being watched in your own home was significantly more unheard of back in the day compared to now, where it's almost like a base level expectation. He's also looking around, and we learn about the Ministry of Truth, or mini-true in Newspeak. Newspeak is it's like the new language in Oceania, which is where Winston lives. And it is essentially like words being more and more parsed down. And we'll talk about it, I think, in like 2 or 3 chapters, where like the goal of the government is to get rid of words, like literally just get rid of words. And it's not good and bad, it's good and ungood. Or it's just like combining and like simplifying the language to like a disgusting degree that we'll talk about more in a minute. But anyway, sorry. The Ministry of Truth, the official language of Oceania, startlingly different from any other object in sight. It was an enormous pyramidal structure of glittering white concrete, soaring up terrace after terrace, 300 meters into the air. From where Winston stood, it was just possible to read, picked out on its white face in elegant lettering, the 3 slogans of the party. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. The Ministry of Truth contained, it was said, 3,000 rooms above ground level and corresponding ramifications below. Scattered about London, there was just 3 other buildings of similar appearance and size. So completely did they dwarf the surrounding architecture that from the roof of the Victory Mansions, you could see all 4 of them simultaneously. They were the homes of the 4 ministries, between which the entire apparatus of government was divided. The Ministry of Truth, which concerned itself with news, entertainment, education, and fine arts. The Ministry of Peace, which concerned itself with war. The Ministry of Love, which maintained law and order. And the Ministry of Plenty, which was responsible for economic affairs. Their names in Newspeak: Mini True, Mini Pax, Mini Love, Mini Plenty. The Ministry of Love was the really frightening one. There were no windows in it at all. Winston had never been inside the Ministry of Love, nor within half a kilometer of it. It was a place impossible to enter except on official business, and then only by penetrating through a maze of barbed wire entanglements, steel doors, and hidden machine gun nests. In Winston's apartment, there's this little alcove just next to and kind of behind the TV that would have been intended to be a bookshelf of some sort or a little desk thing, and that's what he's using it as. So he is haunched in this little alcove and he pulls out a notebook and he begins writing on it. And this is a huge, huge deal because the thing he was about to do was to open a diary. This is not illegal. Nothing was illegal since there was no longer any laws. But if detected, it was reasonably certain that it would be punished by death or at least by 25 years in a forced labor camp. He had bought this piece of paper, this journal diary thing, from proletariat, which is the working class people. He's kind of white collar because he works in one of the ministries. And then there's the lower class citizens essentially are called the proletariats. And he bought it from one of their shops where they have a little bit more freedom in the things that they can sell. Again, we'll unpack it in a little bit. But he gets a hold of this diary because he is starting to question the party. And the party is obviously the ones that are running the government and who he works for. And he's directly supporting through his work and stuff. And he's starting to question everything. And he just wants to write some stuff down. And he's not sure who he's writing to, right? But he's just it needs to get documented in some way. But how could you communicate with the future? It was of its nature impossible. Either the future would resemble the present, in which case it would not listen to him, or it would be different from it, and his predicament would be meaningless. So as he's writing, he's realizing who he's writing to. One of his coworkers is a guy named O'Brien, and he and O'Brien had shared this look, and an unmistakable message had been passed. It was as though the 2 minds had opened and thoughts were flowing from one into the other through their eyes. I am with you, O'Brien seemed to be saying to him. I know precisely what you are feeling. I know all about your contempt, your hatred, your disgust, but don't worry, I am on your side. And then the flash of intelligence was gone, and O'Brien's face was as inscrutable as everyone else's. That was all, and he was already uncertain whether it had happened. Such incidences never had a sequel. There's a moment where in the middle of writing, he gets interrupted by his neighbor knocking on his door. He looks down at it, and this entire time, he's kind of thinking and spacing out. All he has written is a repeated message of down with Big Brother. And he doesn't know where it came from. He didn't really register that this is what's happening, but it's freaking him out. And he just knows writing that and thinking that and feeling that he might as well already be vaporized, which is what they call it when the people get taken by the party for having these negative party thoughts or anti-government thoughts, and they just get taken away and completely written off of the planet. And so when his neighbor knocks on the door, he gets interrupted. He looks down, he sees this, he's like, I'm already a dead man, no point in trying to hide it. So he goes to his neighbors. She asks him to unclog their sink, I believe. He goes over there to help out. They have kids. And the kids are raised to be spies, to try and find people who are anti-government and to report them. And the kids are just completely numb to violence and to anything. And all he's thinking is how terrified his parents must be. Because even if you were to mumble something in your sleep that even was vaguely anti-government, the kids would report them inevitably and they would die, right? It's the whole thing. Really, really scary. The kids are terrifyingly described. And he's just left very uncomfortable and scared that he's going to, again, be discovered or that they'll be able to see through him and sense his thoughts, right? But he goes back to his flat, Nothing really happens between the neighbor or anything. And when he gets there, he pulls a coin out of his pocket. He took a 25-cent piece out of his pocket. There, too, in tiny clear lettering, the same slogan were inscribed, and on the other face of the coin, the head of Big Brother. Even from the coin, the eyes pursued you. On coins, on stamps, on the covers of books, on banners, on posters, and on the wrappings of a cigarette packet. Everywhere. Always the eyes watching you and the voice enveloping you. Asleep or awake, working or eating, indoors or outdoors, in the bath or in bed, no escape. Nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters inside your skull. He goes on about his night and just kind of accepting this idea that he was already dead, he reflected. It seemed to him that it was only now, when he had begun to be able to formulate his thoughts, that he had taken the decisive step. The consequences of every act are included in the act itself. He wrote, "Thought crime does not entail death. Thought crime is death." Now he had recognized himself as a dead man. It became important to stay alive as long as possible. And we go into chapter 3. And the only other thing too, just like, because I keep thinking of things late and I just have to yap and I have to bring it up. The other thing too about this big TV thing that's like constantly screaming and the volume is so loud and you can never turn it off and it's like just penetrating your thoughts and you never get a moment of peace, is also like an inherently purposeful thing that the government is doing to not allow people to be able to think, to not allow people to be able to have their own thoughts, right? This is all kind of like feeding into the general chaotic state of what's happening in the world. There's also like a war going on. When he was looking out his window and describing a bunch of the buildings around, it's all damaged from missiles and there's just chaos and poverty and whatever. And even though technically, again, he lives in a place called the Mansions, it's so freaking good. Please, for the love of God, go read this book, okay? But anyway, in chapter 3, Winston has a dream about his mom and his sister who had been vaporized. He was out in the light and air while they were being sucked down to death, and they were down there because he was up here. He knew it, and they knew it, and he could see the knowledge in their faces. There was no reproach either in their faces or in their hearts, only the knowledge that they must die in order that he might remain alive, and that this was part of the unavoidable order of things. He could not remember what happened, but he knew in his dream that in some way the lives of his mother and sister had been sacrificed to his own. It was one of those dreams which, while retaining the characteristic dream scenery, are a continuation of one's intellectual life, and in which one becomes aware of facts and ideas which still seem new and valuable after one is awake. The thing that now suddenly struck Winston was that his mother's death nearly 30 years ago had been tragic and sorrowful in a way that was no longer possible. Tragedy, he perceived, belonged to the ancient time, to a time when there was still privacy, love, and friendship, and when the members of a family stood by one another without needing to know the reason. His mother's memory tore at his heart because she had died loving him, and when he was too young and selfish to love her in return, and because somehow, he did not remember how, she had sacrificed herself to a conception of loyalty that was private and unalterable. Such things, he saw, could not happen today. Today there was fear, hatred, and pain, but no dignity of emotion, no deep or complex sorrows. All this he seemed to see in the large eyes of his mother and his sister, looking up at him through the green water hundreds of fathoms down and still sinking. So obviously this messes with him quite a bit, but he tries to go on about his day because he doesn't really have a choice. He goes to work. And he has a coughing fit, but it had not quite driven out of Winston's mind the impression made by his dream, and the rhythmic movements of the exercise restored it somewhat. As he mechanically shot his arms back and forth, they are doing like exercises before they start their workday, wearing on his face the look of grim enjoyment, which was considered proper during physical jerks, he was struggling to think his way backward into a dim period of his early childhood. It was extraordinarily difficult. Beyond the late 50s, everything faded. When there was no external records that you could refer to, even the outline of your own life lost its sharpness. You remembered huge events, which had quite probably not happened. You remembered the detail of incidences, without being able to recapture their atmosphere. And there were long blank periods to which you could assign nothing. Everything had been different then. Even the names of countries and their shapes on the map had been different. Airstrip 1, for instance, had not been called so in those days. It had been called England or Britain, though London, he felt fairly certain, had always been called London. Winston could not definitively remember a time when his country had not been at war, but it was evident that there had been a fairly long interval of peace during his childhood, because one of his earliest memories was of an air raid which appeared to take everyone by surprise. Since about that time, war had been literally continuous. Though strictly speaking, it had not always been the same war. For several months during his childhood, there had been confused street fighting in London itself, some of which he remembered vividly. But to trace out the history of the whole period, to say who was fighting whom at any given moment, would have been utterly impossible, since no written record, no spoken word, ever made mention of any other alignment than the existing one. At this moment, for example, in 1984, if it was 1984, Oceania was at war with Eurasia and had an alliance with East Asia, and no public or private utterance of it was ever admitted that the three powers had at any time been grouped along with different lines. Actually, as Winston well knew, it was only 4 years since Oceania had been at war with East Asia and in alliance with Eurasia, but that was merely a piece of furtive knowledge that he had to possess because his memory was not satisfactorily under control. Officially, the change of partners had never happened. Oceania was at war with Eurasia. Therefore, Oceania had always been at war with Eurasia. The enemy of the moment always represented absolute evil, and it followed that any past or future agreement with him was impossible. The frightening thing, he reflected on, for the 10,000th time, as he forced his shoulders painfully backward, was that it might all be true. If the party could thrust its hand into the past and say of this or that event, it never happened, that surely was more terrifying than the mere torture and death. The party said that Oceania had never been in alliance with Eurasia. He, Winston Smith, knew that Oceania had been in alliance with Eurasia as short of a time as 4 years ago, but where did that knowledge exist? Only in his own consciousness, which in any case must soon be annihilated. And if all others accepted the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. Who controls the past, ran the party slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present, controls the past. And yet the past, though of its nature alterable, never had been altered. Whatever was true now was true from everlasting to everlasting. It was quite simple. All that was needed was an unending series of victories over your own memory. Reality control, they called it. In Newspeak, it was called doublethink. So the general idea being, right, the party is quite literally rewriting history to be reflective of whatever their current stance is. He works, and I guess we'll talk about it in a second where exactly he works, but he's part of the group of people that goes through and changes history and like rewrites it to be supportive of the party and the, whatever the current story is that they're going with. And it's the general idea of how dangerous it is to rewrite history and to change things and to tell different stories than what, actually happened or what you had previously been told. And then it's just like gaslighting people until they believe this like new reality that you're like force feeding upon them. And it's craziness. It's just a lot. So the past, he had reflected, had not merely been altered. It had actually been destroyed. For how could you establish even the most obvious fact when there existed no record outside of your own memory? Yeah, that's crazy. Again, the importance of historians, the importance of unbiased journalism and historical accounts, and truly, like, especially in cases of war, and again, this is just Kaylee going on like a side tangent about things, history is written by the victor, right? So whenever you have a war, obviously the dead people can't write about it. The people who lost the war, their story isn't the one that gets told to the masses or that gets like, passed down. Or at least like if you're in the country who wins the war, you hear the winning side of it. You don't hear the other people's side and you don't get like a full account of what actually happened. So like inherently the history that we're taught is biased based on like who's telling it, blah, blah, blah. It's like a whole thing anyway. But the fact of like the ability to go back and then change what has historically been told, and then you completely lose what was once the past, or what, was once believed to be the past, what happened, and then you end up calling everything into question of what truth really is and what reality really is and who freaking knows. And it's just this like unease of everything. It just further goes into the validation and the importance, again, of historians and journalism and fact finders and scientists and having faith in the institutions that are providing accurate and like well-rounded information, and that the things that these institutions publish is truthful and does not change. Yeah? You know what I'm saying? When you lose faith in those things, when you can't trust what is being published by such institutions, you have things like 1984 that happen where the general public does not know who to trust. And if you cannot trust your government, then what can you trust? If you cannot trust journalism, what can you trust? The first draft is always the most important. The first draft of history is always the most important. Anyway, chapter 4. So this is what I was saying. So he works for the records department at the Ministry of Truth. This process of continuous alteration was applied to not only newspapers, but to books, periodicals, pamphlets, posters, leaflets, films, soundtracks, cartoons, photographs, to every kind of literature or documentation that might conceivably hold any political or ideological significance. Day by day and almost minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. In this way, every prediction made by the party could be shown by documentary evidence to have been correct. Nor was any item of news or any expression of opinion which conflicted with the needs of the movement ever allowed to remain on record. All history was scraped clean and reinscribed exactly as often as it was necessary. In no case would it have been possible, once the deed was done, to prove that any falsification had taken place. The largest section of the records department, far larger than the one in which Winston worked, consisted simply of persons whose duty it was to track down and collect all copies of books, newspapers, and other documents which had been superseded and were due for destruction. A number of the Times, which might be because of changes in political alignment or mistaken prophecies uttered by Big Brother, have been rewritten a dozen times, still stood on the files bearing its original date, and no other copy existed to contradict it. Books also were recalled and rewritten again and again and were invariably reissued without any admission that any alteration had been made. Even the written instructions, which Winston received and which he invariably got rid of as soon as he had dealt with them, never stated or implied that an act of forgery was to be committed. Always the reference was to slips, errors, misprints, or misquotations, which it was necessary to put right in the interests of accuracy. But actually, he thought, as he readjusted the Ministry of Plenty's figures, it was not even forgery. It was merely the substitution of one piece of nonsense for another. Most of the material that you were dealing with had no connection with anything in the real world, not even the kind of connection that is contained in a direct lie. Statistics were just as much as a fantasy in their original version as in their rectified version. A great deal of the time you were expected to make them up out of your own head. For example, the Ministry of Plenty's forecast had estimated the output of boots for the quarter at 145 million pairs. The actual output was given as 62 million. Winston, however, in rewriting the forecast, marked the figure down to 57 millions, so as to allow the usual claim that the quota had been overfulfilled. In any case, 62 millions was no nearer to the truth than 57 millions, or than 145 millions. Very likely no boots had been produced at all. Likelier still, nobody knew how many had been produced, much less cared. All one knew was that every quarter, astronomical numbers of boots were produced on paper, while perhaps half the population of Oceania went barefoot. And so it was at every class of recorded fact, great or small. Everything faded away into a shadow world in which finally, even the date of the year had become uncertain. Do you see why I'm telling you to go and read this book? And I could literally, there's like so much that I have highlighted in this. I could literally just read you quotes from this all day. I so badly just want to read you the entirety of this. And I want you so badly to read this and to think about things. The records department, after all, was itself only a single branch of the Ministry of Truth, whose primary job was not to reconstruct the past, but to supply the citizens of Oceania with newspapers, films, textbooks, telescreen programs, plays, novels, with every conceivable kind of information, instruction, or entertainment, from a statute to a slogan, from a lyric poem to a biological treatise, and from a child's spelling book to a Newspeak dictionary. And the ministry had not only to supply the multifarious needs of the party, but also to repeat the whole operation at a lower level for the benefit of the proletariat. There was a whole chain of separate departments dealing with the proletarian literature, music, drama, and entertainment generally. Here were produced rubbish newspapers containing almost nothing except sport, crime, and astrology, sensational 5-cent novelettes, films oozing with sex, and sentimental songs which were composed entirely by mechanical means on a special kind of kaleidoscope, known as a versificator. There was even a whole subsection, pornosec, it was called in Newspeak, engaged in producing the lowest kind of pornography, which was sent out in sealed packets in which no party member, other than those who worked on it, was permitted to look at. But he's reading through, and this day he gets like his 3 little rolled up pieces of work where he's told about these misprints and these mistakes that are in history that he has to go through and correct and kind of fill the holes in. And on this particular day, he's making an unperson. So it's when somebody who, I'll talk about it in a second, but pretty much you make this person disappear from history. The guy that he is making disappear is named Withers. So Winston did not know why Withers had been disgraced. Perhaps it was for corruption or incompetence. Perhaps Big Brother was merely getting rid of a too popular subordinate. Perhaps Withers or someone close to him had been suspected of heretical tendencies. Or perhaps what was likeliest of all, the thing had simply happened because purges and vaporizations were a necessary part of the mechanics of government. The only real clue lay in the words refs unpersons, which indicated that Withers was already dead. You could not invariably assume this to be the case when people were arrested. Sometimes they were released and allowed to remain at liberty for as much as a year or 2 before being executed. Very occasionally, some person whom you had believed to be dead long since would make a ghostly reappearance at some public trial where he would implicate hundreds of others by his testimony before vanishing, this time forever. Withers, however, was already an unperson. He did not exist. He had never existed. Winston decided it would not be enough simply to reverse the tendency of Big Brother's speech. It was better to make it deal with something totally unconnected with its original subject. So he was removing references of Withers in this piece of media, and so instead Winston is creating this completely random story about this hero guy, this completely made up character to fill in the place of where Withers was referenced, and made this guy again some godly savior person, right? And so after work, not after work, but in the middle of the shift after he's done writing the story, he looks up from his cubicle and he sees his rival, and something seemed to tell him with certainty that Tillotson, his cubicle mate guy, was busy on the same job as himself. There was no way of knowing whose job would finally be adopted, but he felt a profound conviction that it would be his own. The guy that he had created in this story was Comrade Augie, unimagined an hour ago and was now a fact. It struck him as curious that you could create a dead man, but not living ones. Comrade Augie, who had never existed in the present, now existed in the past. And when once the act of forgery was forgotten, he would exist just as authentically and upon the same evidence as Julius Caesar. Oh my God. Oh my God. I am already 30 minutes into this, and I am only chapter 5. Yeah, and I'm only 20% of the way through this. So I'm going to speed it up just a little bit, mostly for my own sanity of trying to get this video out. And so in chapter 5, he goes to lunch and he ends up sitting with one of his coworkers. This guy, he works in the department that is responsible for working on the dictionary. The 11th edition is the definitive edition, he said. We're getting the language into its final shape, the shape it's going to have when nobody speaks anything else. And when we finished with it, people like you will have to learn it all over again. You think, I dare say, that our chief job is inventing new words, but not a bit of it. We're destroying words, scores of them, hundreds of them, every day. We're cutting the language down to the bone. The 11th edition won't contain a single word that will become obsolete before the year 2050. It's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words. Of course, the greatest wastage is in the verbs and adjectives, but there are hundreds of nouns that can be got rid of as well. It isn't only the synonyms, there are also the antonyms. After all, what justification is there for a word which is simply the opposite of some other word? A word contains its opposite in itself. Take good, for instance. If you have a word like good, what need is there for a word like bad? Ungood will do just as well. Better because it's the exact opposite, which the other is not. Or again, if you want a stronger version of good, What sense is there in having a whole string of vague, useless words like excellent and splendid and all the rest of them? Plus good covers the meaning, or double plus good if you really want something stronger still. Of course, we use those forms already, but in the final version of Newspeak, there will be nothing else. In the end, the whole notion of goodness and badness will be covered by only 6 words. In reality, only 1 word. Don't you see the beauty of that, Winston? Don't you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words in which to express it. Every concept that can ever be needed will be expressed by exactly 1 word, with its meaning rigidly defined and all of its subsidiary meanings rubbed out and forgotten. Already in the 11th edition, we're not far from that point, but the process will still be continuing long after you and I are dead. Every year, fewer and fewer words, in the range of consciousness, always a little smaller. Even now, of course, there's no reason or excuse for committing thought crime. It's merely a question of self-discipline, reality control. But in the end, there won't be any need for even that. The revolution will be complete when the language is perfect. Newspeak, has it ever occurred to you, Winston, that by the year 2050, at the very latest, not a single human being will be alive who could understand such conversations as we are having now? And Winston, on the tip of his tongue, is about to push back and say, well, except for, he doesn't say it, and so the guy says it for him, which is, he's wanting to say, except for the proletariat people. And the guy says, the proles are not human beings, he said carelessly. By 2050, earlier probably, all real knowledge of Old Speak will have disappeared. The whole literature of the past will have been destroyed. Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, Byron, they'll exist only in Newspeak versions, not merely changed into something different, but actually changed into something contradictory of what they used to be. Even the literature of the party will change. Even the slogans will change. How could you have a slogan like freedom is slavery when the concept of freedom has been abolished? The whole climate of thought will be different. In fact, there will be no thought as we understand it now. Oh, good Lord. That's a crazy thing to think about. So we're going to talk about that for 1 second, and then I'll tell you about the rest of the chapter. So this idea, fundamentally, right, simplifying language, taking away thought, so that, like, how can you even have, thoughts of whatever that's contradictory if the words for those thoughts don't even exist? If the words for those ideas don't even exist, how would you even think them in the first place? Absolutely insane concept, and absolutely reinforces the idea that reading is inherently political. You might have heard that be said before. To read, to critically think, to expand your knowledge, to get the experience and hear voices from other people and get other lenses and, like, expanding kind of your general horizons and thought processes on things is inherently political. And that's not, like, to say that it's in a bad way. It's not like, I'm not saying it in, like, a combative way, which I feel like is so crappy that to say something is political automatically means combative. Like, it just kind of sucks that that's the, like, synonymous these days. But the act of, like, individuality and thinking for yourself and, like, breaking thought from maybe the norm or what, like, you're told directly to think is against the bigger picture, right? Like, that's all, like, against this, like, the bigger guide in society and, like, the norms that are, like, pressed upon us by, whoever and whatever it is. It's important, critically important, like I said at the top of this, to read and think and have your own opinions on things and to think for yourself. And I've said this in a couple other videos about how important it is that if you consume a piece of media, to form an opinion on it before you go and listen to your favorite commenter's opinion on it, before you go and, like, I don't know, talk to your friends or family about it or your coworkers and hear through these other sources about, like, what their opinions are. It is so critically important for you to think about it for yourself and how it makes you feel and what your, like, gut initial reaction is. And then you can go and get other people's input and see how maybe it shapes or, sways or dissuades you one way or another. Obviously, keeping in mind that, again, the media that we inherently consume is biased in one way or another, just because that's just how the world is these days. So if you're reading about something, you want to make sure you're reading it from multiple sources to get the most, like, unbiased, straightforward account of what's going on. Ideally, a firsthand account of what's going on, but that's a whole other thing. It's just, and it also, this is all supportive of Fahrenheit 451, and you can see where and why Ray Bradbury has gotten inspiration from 1984 when he wrote Fahrenheit 451. Again, if you're unfamiliar, in that one, the government had gone through and burned all of the books because, again, like, ignorance was peace. And if people read and if they know these things and these books tell these things, then you have people that feel inadequate or people that don't know as much as them. And then you end up with this like civil unrest is what the argument was. And so they just got rid of books altogether so people could be like equal. It's another one. You should definitely go and watch that video if you are unfamiliar with that book either. Language is so important. Expressing yourself is so important. Individuality is so critically important. And I know I keep using that word. I'm sure it's so annoying, and I wish I had another synonym for it. But I cannot think of any other word than like critical. that you take these things that I'm reading to you in these quotes and these things that I'm saying, like really, really think over a lot of this stuff and like mull it over, freaking food for thought, all of this stuff, and go and read this. Okay. Like, you need to do some self-reflection. You may have already, I get that. And if you've read this book before, I get that. You need to go and do it again. The rest of the chapter, it gets announced, like they get like interrupted in the middle of their lunch with the news stating like, oh, this is so amazing. The cost of living has gone up 20%. Oh my gosh, congratulations, everybody. And the day before, when he was at his neighbor's house, there was a similar news thing that had gone up that was saying like how great everybody was doing. And so they were going to lower rations by 20%, which also doesn't make any sense. And so Winston realizes in that moment of like, so we lost 20% of what we were getting from the government, but they're saying the cost of living has gone up 20%. So we're like netting negative 40%, right? That's not actually how it works. I know that's not the correct math, but you understand what I'm saying, of like, they're just like double whammy, gonna have less and less things to survive off of, but the government is painting it as though this is a positive experience, and everybody who's listening is like, yeah, 20% raised of cost of living, this is so awesome. And Winston's just sitting there like, The only other thing to note in chapter 5 is there's this dark-haired young woman, she's like in her mid to late 20s, who comes in and she catches his eye, and he's seen her around a couple of times, and he thinks that she might be a spy or that she might work for the party or that like whatever, and she's like spying on him essentially, or like trying to catch him doing something bad. And so he just takes note of her. In chapter 6, when he goes home that night, he is thinking about this dark-haired woman that he had seen, and it makes him reflect on his wife. He's married, but he has not seen her in years. The aim of the party was not to merely prevent men and women from forming loyalties, which it might not be able to control. Its real, undeclared purpose was to remove all pleasure from the sexual act. Not love so much as eroticism was the enemy, inside marriage as well as outside of it. All marriages between party members had to be approved by a committee appointed for the purpose, and though the principle was never clearly stated, permission was always refused if the couple concerned gave the impression of being physically attracted to one another. The only recognized purpose of marriage was to beget children for the service of the party. Sexual intercourse was to be looked on as a slightly disgusting minor operation like having an enema. This, again, was never put into plain words, but in an indirect way, it was rubbed into every party member from childhood onwards. There were even organizations such as the Junior Anti-Sex League, which advocated complete celibacy for both sexes. All children were to be begotten by artificial insemination, or ARTSEM, as it was called in Newspeak, and brought up in public institutions. This, Winston was aware, was not meant altogether seriously, but somehow it fitted in with the general ideology of the party. The party was trying to kill the sex instinct, or if it could not be killed, then to distort it and dirty it. He did not know why this was so, but it seemed natural that it should be so. And as far as the women were concerned, the party's efforts were largely successful, because his wife was very anti doing anything with him, and the couple of times he had tried, she was just like very, very non-responsive to anything, and it was just this like huge point of contention in their marriage and stuff. And he like hated her so much in general. Like, obviously they got married because pretty much like the party told them to. It was kind of this like arranged marriage situation, and once they had gotten married and living together, he realized that she was the human soundtrack He had nicknamed her in his own mind because there was not a single original thought in her head, or there was not a single thought in her head that was not a slogan of some sort. And with the party kind of stripping away this whole idea of like urges and like general feelings of that, or any type of acknowledgement that that is like a healthy, natural thing in, human beings, he's like hired like S workers and has like done things that way just to like get it out of his system. And in chapter 6, that's exactly what he is doing, is hiring an S worker to try and like get this like pent up, built up energy out. And it is viewed negatively upon by the party, but it's also one of those things that they just kind of like turn a blind eye to some degree. And even afterwards, it had not worked. The urge to shout filthy words at the top of his voice was as strong as ever. In chapter 7, he's just writing in his diary. "If there is hope," wrote Winston, "it lies in the proles. If there was hope, it must lie in the proles, because only there, in those swarming disregarded masses, 85% of the population of Oceania, could the force to destroy the party ever be generated. The party could not be overthrown from within. Its enemies, if it had any enemies, had no way of coming together or even identifying one another. Even if the legendary brotherhood existed, just as possibly it might, it was inconceivable that its members could ever assemble in larger numbers than 2s and 3s. Rebellion meant a look in the eyes, an inflection of the voice, at most an occasional whispered word. But the proles, if they ever could somehow become conscious of their own strength, would have no need to conspire. They needed only to rise up and shake themselves like a horse shaking off flies. If they chose, they could blow the party to pieces tomorrow morning. Surely, sooner or later, it must occur to them to do it. And yet, he has like a reflection when he had gone through one of the like proletariat neighborhoods, and there was like just like fighting, and it was like a dirty neighborhood, and there was a bunch of fighting, and everybody's like drinking all the time. And he's like, they can't even band together, and all they do is like think of themselves. Until they become conscious, they will never rebel. And until they have rebelled, they cannot become conscious. Because, yet again, it is this like self-fulfilling prophecy almost, where the party is saying that the proletariats are these like, inhuman base level urges. All they do is like drink and gamble and, are uneducated and all these things, but then the government is like literally force feeding that lifestyle upon them, forcing a lottery and like X-rated content, and that's like all that they're given. They're not given good educations, if educations at all. They're forced to work in these like labor camps. They're like pretty much like set up for failure to just like continue this cycle. So yeah, obviously, right? You keep people ignorant. Like, it's just like, ugh. We're not getting into it. Yeah. So what I will, I'll just keep reading. I'm just going to keep reading this like big wall of text. So keep in mind, again, I'm cutting out a lot of stuff. There is a lot more like very important quotes and whatnot that I'm cutting out just for like time's sake out of this video. But there were a few agents of the thought police that moved always, among them being like the proletariat neighborhoods and whatnot, spreading false rumors and marking down and eliminating the few individuals who were judged capable of becoming dangerous. But no attempt was made to indoctrinate them with the ideology of the party. It was not desirable that the proles should have strong political feelings. All that was required of them was a primitive patriotism which could be appealed to whenever it was necessary to make them accept longer working hours or shorter rations. And even when they became discontented, as they sometimes did, their discontent led nowhere, because being without general ideas, they could only focus it on petty, specific grievances. The larger evils invariably escaped their notice. The great majority of proles did not have telescreens in their homes. Even the civil police interfered with them very little. There was a vast amount of criminality in London, a whole world within a world of thieves, bandits, prostitutes, drug dealers, and racketeers of every description. But since it all happened among the proles themselves, it was of no importance. In all questions of morals, they were allowed to follow their ancestral code. The sexual puritanism of the party was not imposed upon them. Promiscuity went unpunished. Divorce was permitted. For that matter, even religious worship would have been permitted if the proles had shown any sign of needing or wanting it. They were beneath suspicion. As the party slogan put it, proles and animals are free. And so he talks about how day and night, the telescreens bruised your ears with statistics proving that people today had more food, more clothes, better houses, better recreations, that they lived longer, worked shorter hours, were bigger, healthier, stronger, happier, more intelligent, better educated than the people of 50 years ago. Not a word of it could ever be proved or disproved. The party claimed, for example, that today 40% of adult proles were literate. Before the revolution, it said the number had only been 15%. The party claimed that the infant mortality rate was now only 160 per thousand, whereas before the revolution, it had been 300. And so it went on. It was like a single equation with two unknowns. It might very well be that literally every word in the history books, even the things that one accepted without question, was pure fantasy. For all he knew, there might never have been such a law as just prime noctis, or any such creature as a capitalist, or any such garment as a top hat. It leads to him reflecting on like why he started questioning everything in the first place. And so there was an event like 7 years ago where there was these 3 men that he were with that had gotten taken, and everybody got told that they had died. And then it was like a couple years later, this photo shows up that proves that they were alive, that proves that what they had confessed to in these crimes that like led to their death or whatever. There was a photo that proved that they did not commit it, that they were still alive, that like everything is a freaking lie. And it like made him like question absolutely everything. And so that was like the beginning of the downfall, or the beginning of his like, you know, not just blindly going along with like what the party told him. So there was only one possible conclusion, right? That the confessions were a lie. That was 10 or 11 years ago. Today, probably he would have kept that photograph. It was curious that the fact of having held it in his fingers seemed to him to make the difference even now, when the photograph itself, as well as the event it recorded, was only memory. Was the party's hold upon the past less strong, he wondered, because a piece of evidence which existed no longer had once existed. And so he's thinking about it more, and he's like, I understand how, right? Like, I understand how the party rewrites history, but I don't understand why. He wondered, as he had many times wondered before, whether he himself was a lunatic. Perhaps a lunatic was simply a minority of one. At one time, it had been a sign of madness to believe that the earth goes round the sun. Today, to believe that the past is unalterable. He might be alone in holding that belief, and if alone, then a lunatic. But the thought of being a lunatic did not greatly trouble him. The horror was that he might also be wrong. He picked up the children's history book and looked at the portrait of Big Brother, which formed in its frontispiece. The hypnotic eyes gazed into his own. It was as though it was some huge force were pressing down upon you, something that penetrated inside your skull, battering against your brain, frightening you out of your beliefs, persuading you, almost, to deny the evidence of your senses. In the end, the party would announce that 2 and 2 made 5, and you would have to believe it. It was inevitable that they should make that claim sooner or later. The logic of their position demanded it. Not merely the validity of experience, but in the very existence of external reality. The tacity denied by their philosophy. The heresy of heresies was common sense. And what was terrifying was not that they would kill you for thinking otherwise, but they might be right. For after all, how do we know that 2 and 2 make 4, or that the force of gravity works, or that the past is unchangeable? If both the past and the external world exist only in the mind, and if the mind itself is controllable, what then? The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. His heart sank as he thought of the enormous power arrayed against him, the ease with which any party intellectual would overthrow him in debate, the subtle arguments which he would not be able to understand, much less answer. And yet he was in the right. They were in the wrong, and he was in the right. The obvious, the silly, and the true had got to be defended. Truisms are true. Hold on to that. The solid world exists. Its laws do not change. Stones are hard. Water is wet. Objects unsupported fall towards the earth's center. With the feeling that he was speaking to O'Brien, and also that he was setting forth an important axiom, he wrote, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. If that is granted, all else follows." In chapter 8, Winston makes his way to the proletariat neighborhoods to try to find somebody who remembers the way that life used to be. And he makes an interesting comment about how he ran into a group of people that were talking about the lottery. The lottery, with its weekly payout of enormous prizes, was the one public event to which the proles paid serious attention. It was probable that there were some millions of proles whom the lottery was the principal, if not the only reason for remaining alive. It was their delight, their folly, their intellectual stimulant. Where the lottery was concerned, even people who could barely read and write seemed capable of intricate calculations and staggering feats of memory. There was a whole tribe of men who made a living simply by selling systems, forecasts, and lucky amulets. Winston had nothing to do with the running of the lottery, which was managed by the Ministry of Plenty, but he was aware, indeed everyone in the party was aware, that the prizes were largely imaginary. Only small sums were actually paid out, the winners of the big prizes being non-existent persons. In the absence of any real intercommunication between one part of Oceania and the other, this was not difficult to arrange. So he's there trying to find like somebody who's old enough to remember things. And so he ends up going into this bar and stumbling across this old man. They have a bit of a discussion back and forth, and the old guy just like keeps getting distracted and won't necessarily answer his questions, not because he doesn't want to, but because the old guy's like getting absolutely freaking hammered and just doesn't have like maybe the forethought or the like the reasoning skills to see what he's like trying to get at, you know what I'm saying? And so it ultimately just leaves Winston feeling pretty like empty and hollow, and he doesn't really get an answer about this idea of if the past was better before the revolution. And really the only thing that he kind of walks away with is the old guy telling him, the old guy's like, yeah, I know what you want to hear. You want me to tell you that the youth is always better and that like I wish that I were young again. And he brings this up, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but it's come up so far too of this idea of like the individual experience versus the experience of like society as a whole, and like like in this example, the proletariat people as a whole, or just like the functioning of society being healthier and better and whatever, 20, 40, 50 years ago, not this one particular old guy's experience specifically, if that makes sense. And so the discussion, ultimately, he doesn't really get any answers to it. Within 20 years at the most, he reflected, the huge and simple question, was life better before the revolution than it is now, would have ceased once and for all to be answerable. But in effect, it was unanswerable even now, since the few scattered survivors from the ancient world were incapable of comparing one age with another. They remembered a million useless things: a quarrel with a workmate, a hunt for a lost bicycle pump, the expression on a long dead sister's face, the swirls of dust on a windy morning 70 years ago. But all the relevant facts were outside the range of their vision. They were like the ant, which can see small objects but not large ones. And when memory failed and written records were falsified, when that happened, the claim of the party to have improved the conditions of human life had got to be accepted, because there did not exist, and never again could exist, any standard against which it could be tested. Holy freaking crap. And so he leaves this bar, and he ends up going to the shop where he had bought the diary from previously. It's like this little antique shop, and he talks to the guy there. There's really no antiques anymore. It's all been like, all the metal had been melted down. All of the glass and everything else has been like breakable or disintegrated or used in some other way that it's just not sought after. And especially with the idea of the party keeping, the current way of being, the only way of being that has ever existed, the idea of like antiques and whatnot is not like appreciated in any type of way. So he's talking to this guy, trying to find more stuff. He ends up finding like a paperweight, and then the guy offers for him to come upstairs and look at some of the other goods that he has. And upstairs is like this little room, mini apartment type thing that Winston thinks about, that he could rent this out for like a couple dollars a week and be here and find peace, because again, there's no telescreen. He doesn't have to worry about the like police and Big Brother keeping an eye on him, because it's in the middle of like the proletariat area. So there's not this like same like foreboding presence of being watched all the time. And he's just thinking how peaceful that it would be. And he leaves the shop to go on about his day after that. There's obviously, again, there's like definitely some more discussion. I'm trying to cut out what I can for the sake of the video. Again, and I'll say it a million times more, go read the book. But with that, we end part 1 and we go into part 2. And now that we're through part 1, part 2 is going to go like significantly faster. So part 2, chapter 1, he's at work, and a few days later, that dark-haired girl, Oh, and also I guess by the way too, so at the end of that, when he left the guy's shop, he saw the girl. And so he's like, okay, no, this is definitely confirmation. Like, she is spying on me because she has no other reason to be in this neighborhood. And so then in part 2, she runs into him at work, like intentionally bumps into him and like falls over and passes him a little folded up piece of paper. And eventually when he looks at it, it says, I love you. And she works in a different department of the ministry of whatever, where he is. And because she works in a different department, there's not really any situations for them to really bump into each other ever, or like have any type of more conversations. But she does get close enough to him at one point to tell him to meet her in the middle of town. And he's like, but there's people around and there's screens and we'll be surveilled. And she's like, nobody can hear us if there's enough people around though. And we'll just act like we're not talking to each other. So he does. He meets her, and in chapter 2, they meet at this separate location out in the country, hidden from eyes and ears and microphones and whatnot. And they end up kissing and try to do more, and it doesn't really go very, very well. And one of the quotes that I have pulled from this section is where they talk about doing it, and he's only ever done it with his wife, but she has done it with like hundreds of men. And he says, listen, the more men that you've had, the more I love you. Do you understand that? I hate purity. I hate goodness. I don't want any virtue to exist anywhere. I want everyone to be corrupt to the bones. Well, I ought to suit you, dear. I'm corrupt to the bones. You like doing this? I don't mean simply me. I mean the thing itself. I adore it. That was above all what he wanted to hear. Not merely the love of one person, but the animal instinct, the simple, undifferentiated desire. That was the force that would tear the party to pieces. In the old days, he thought a man looked at a girl's body and saw that it was desirable, and that was the end of the story. But you could not have pure love or pure lust nowadays. No emotion was pure because everything was mixed up with fear and hatred. Their embrace had been a battle, the climax a victory. It was a blow struck against the party. It was a political act, which is, again, a crazy sentence. It's crazy. So, right, in this society, where the ruling folks have like deemed sex to be this, disgusting act, and like, should do it at the bare minimum, if ever, like you should only do it for children. And even at that, you shouldn't do it. And it's a form of control, right? It's just furthering this idea of taking away like bodily autonomy and base instinct, and then like channeling that like pent up energy and aggression and like denial of oneself into other things to support the party, and like using that angst to support the hatred and the fueled like anger and stuff that the party thrives on, and taking advantage of these people and like pitting them against each other to like further the agenda of the party. It's like a whole, again, I'm going to read you some more quotes as we go and stuff. I just, So in chapter 3, they are just doing it constantly through part 2. They're constantly like meeting up in all of these various locations and like sneaking away whenever they can to get it on. And one of the quotes one of the quotes I have highlighted is talking about her and how she hated the party and said so in the crudest words, but she made no general criticism of it, except where it touched upon her own life. She had no interest in party doctrine. So this is similar to what I was saying about the old guy, who didn't necessarily have, this like memory of how things were in a general context. And it goes back to the quote about the ant, where like the ant, like the animal or the insect, where people don't really care about what's happening in the world unless it directly impacts them, or people don't care what's happening at like a societal or a political level or a whatever level unless it directly impacts them. And it's incredibly difficult to talk to somebody who sees the world in that way, who is ultimately, it's a level of like selfishness, right? Or like the inability to like have empathy at that level. It's incredibly difficult to talk to somebody like that when you're somebody who does see the big picture and the big picture of like injustice and things that are happening and the impacts that certain actions have on different groups of people, be it people like you or people completely not like you. It's very hard. And one of the times after they are done doing it, he says, "We are dead," because of their affair. And if they get caught doing this and like developing feelings and these urges and like giving into this like primal instinct thing, they'll be killed by the party. And so he says this. He says, we are dead. She says, we're not dead yet. And he says, not physically, 6 months, a year, 5 years, conceivably, I'm afraid of death. You are young, so presumably you're more afraid of it than I am. Obviously, we shall put it off as long as we can, but it makes very little difference. So long as human beings stay human, death and life are the same thing. And one of the times, so he did end up renting out that, the room thing above the little shopkeep, the little antique store. He did end up renting it. And so that's often the place where he and her name is Julia, where they meet up. In chapter 4, they're continuing their affair and their sordid affair. And on this particular day, they're sleeping together and there's a rat in the room. And she throws a shoe at it and handles it and stuff. But there's like a very vague reference to him having a really, really bad phobia to rats relating to some like memory that isn't quite tangible of his, like from childhood, and how there was like something that she was telling a story about these rats in the streets that triggered him like so badly. And so really the only thing is just this like crippling phobia of rats is what we learned in this chapter about him. And also that she keeps bringing like really good quality like coffee and chocolate, and she even bought some makeup to dress up and is going against what the expectations are of party members. And the chocolate and coffee she got is from like the black market because they all get this like really crappy rationed version, but she's young and pretty. And so she like works her way to getting all this nice stuff, and they're like indulging in a whole bunch of stuff. And that's the kind of the point of chapter 4. And when we go into chapter 5, the guy from way earlier who was telling him about that dictionary project and was like really, really excited, Winston had noted at that time that guy's enthusiasm would get him like killed. And it does in chapter 5. Guy disappears. There's no evidence. There's no actual confirmation. Everybody just kind of goes on and acts like the guy never existed, right? He becomes this like unperson. But Winston knows that there's something, and he knows why. And the whole time at work, all he can think about is this apartment and his love for Julia. And he tries to talk to Julia about the brotherhood. It's been kind of vaguely referenced throughout, but this is essentially like the people that are banding together to like stand up against the government, or the like anti-government grouping of folks. But she doesn't want to hear anything about it. And she, again, reiterating this idea of she doesn't think that the party is like oppressive. She sees it as like oppression against an individual, but like not the large scale oppression, if that makes sense. So she's like critical, and she's really mad that the party's like anti-sex because that's something that she enjoys, without acknowledging or seeing or feeling or like thinking deeply about the ways that other people are oppressed. Like that's the only thing that she thinks that they're messed up about, because that's the only thing she cares about. That's the only thing that affects her, right? Like I was saying earlier. And in chapter 6, again, he's working, he's chilling, he's vibing. O'Brien, the guy that we talked about in chapter 1, who he started writing this diary to, who he had that like, you know, this like, not soul bond. I don't know why that's the phrase that came to my mind, but they had this like connection where he thought that O'Brien and him like opened minds and were like sharing their like anti-party ideas. And so he started writing the diary in theory to O'Brien. He runs into him in the hallway. O'Brien offers to lend him a copy of the new dictionary. And Winston takes this as like a veiled invitation to the brotherhood. And he's like, yeah, this is the moment. This is the turning point that like, I know that this is going to end in my death. Like I have officially crossed the party. But he's also kind of, again, excited because he's always wanted to be a part of the brotherhood. And these are all thoughts that have just been like percolating in him for like 7 years, ever since the whole photograph thing and the ultimate discovery that those people were still alive, or that they didn't commit the crimes and the confessions were a lie, and blah, blah, blah. 7 years of this like built up feeling. Finally, it's happening. And so he's finally felt like he's hit like the turning point, the tipping point of all of this. In chapter 7, back in the apartment with Julia, he has a bunch of dreams and memories and stuff of his childhood, and he tries to open up to Julia and tell her about these. He's like, I realized I didn't kill my mom, and he tells her the memory of his mom getting like vaporized and the situation that led up to it, which ultimately, for the sake of this review, doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't really matter. It's just the fact that he's trying to open up to her about things, and she's being kind of dismissive about it and saying like how terrible children are. And he says, yes, but the real point of the story, from her breathing, it was evident that she was going off to sleep again. He would have liked to continue talking about his mother. He did not suppose from what he could remember of her that she had been an unusual woman, still less an intelligent one, and yet she had possessed a kind of nobility, a kind of purity, simply because the standards that she obeyed were private ones. Her feelings were her own and could not be altered from outside. It would not have occurred to her that an action which is ineffectual thereby becomes meaningless. If you loved someone, you loved him, and when you had nothing else to give, you still gave him love. And there's a bunch more about this ideal, but it ends with how it occurs to him that the proles had remained in this condition. They were not loyal to a party or a country or an idea. They were loyal to one another. For the first time in his life, he did not despise the proles or think they were merely an inert force which would one day spring to life and regenerate the world. The proles had stayed human. They had not become hardened inside. They had held on to the primitive emotions which he himself had to relearn by conscious effort. And in thinking this, he remembered, without apparent relevance, how few weeks ago he had seen a severed hand lying on the pavement and had kicked it into the gutter as though it had been a cabbage stalk. The proles are human beings, he said out loud. We are not human. She asks, why not? Has it ever occurred to you that the best thing for us to do would be to simply walk out of here before it's too late and never see each other again? She's like, well, yeah, I've thought about it. And he's like, but we keep coming back here. We may be together for another 6 months, a year, there's no knowing. At the end, we're certain to be apart. Do you realize how utterly alone we shall be? When once they get a hold of us, there will be nothing, literally nothing that either of us can do for the other. If I confess, they'll shoot you. And if I refuse to confess, they'll shoot you just the same. Nothing that I can do or say or stop myself from saying will put off your death for as much as 5 minutes. Neither of us will even know whether the other is dead or alive. We shall be utterly without power of any kind. The one thing that matters is that we shouldn't betray one another, although even that can't make the slightest difference. And then she's like, they can't do that. It's one thing that they can't do. They can make you say anything, but they can't make you believe it. They can't get inside of you. No, he said a little more hopefully. No, that's quite true. They can't get inside of you. If you can feel that staying human is worthwhile, even when it can't have any result whatever, you've beaten them. He thought of the telescreen with its never-sleeping ear. They could spy on you night and day, but if you kept your head, you could still outwit them. With all their cleverness, they had never mastered the secret of finding out what another human being was thinking. Perhaps that was less true when you were actually in their hands. One did not know what happened inside the ministry of love, but it was possible to guess. Tortures, drugs, delicate instruments that registered your nervous reactions, gradual wearing down by sleepless and solitude and persistent questioning. Facts, at any rate, could not be kept hidden. They could be tracked down by inquiry. They could be squeezed out of you by torture. But if the object was not to stay alive, but to stay human, what difference did it ultimately make? They could not alter your feelings. For that matter, you could not alter them yourself, even if you wanted to. They could lay bare in the utmost detail everything that you had done or said or thought, but the inner heart, whose workings were mysterious even to yourself, remained impregnable. And then in chapter 8, Winston and Julia go to O'Brien's to pick up this dictionary, again with the idea, with his understanding and expectation that this is going to be the invite to the brotherhood. O'Brien answers all of Winston's questions about the brotherhood, gives him all the information he wants to, confirms all of Winston's conspiracy theories, and says that he will deliver a copy of Emmanuel Goldstein's book to Winston before saying goodbye. And that is it's pretty much like the the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism, and it offers a history of how the global political structure followed a natural progression from capitalism to socialism before evolving into its current totalitarian state. So it's kind of like the basis of this brotherhood anti-party movement. And so O'Brien's like, yeah, totally, man. Yeah, welcome to the club. I'm glad you came. Yeah, I'll get you the reading material soon. Cut to chapter 9, and Winston is super, super tired. He's been working like a 90-hour work week in 5 days because it's hate week, which is like a hate rally for the country that they're like currently at war with. And in the middle of the rally, no joke, in the middle of it, they changed it. It gets announced that Oceania was not, after all, at war with Eurasia. Oceania was at war with East Asia, and Eurasia was an ally the entire time. And Winston knows that this is going to result in a crazy amount of work for his department to have to go back and now completely edit all of history. Oceania was at war with East Asia. Oceania had always been at war with East Asia. A large part of the political literature of 5 years was now completely obsolete. Reports and records of all kinds, newspapers, books, pamphlets, films, soundtracks, photographs, all had to be rectified at lightning speed. Although no directive was ever issued, it was known that the chiefs of the department intended that within 1 week, no reference to the war with Eurasia or the alliance with East Asia should remain in existence anywhere. The work was overwhelming, all the more because the process that it involved could not be called by their true names. Everyone in the records department worked 18 hours in the 24, with 3-hour snatches of sleep. Mattresses were brought up from cellars and pitched all over the corridors. Meals consisted of sandwiches and Victory coffee wheeled around on trolleys by attendants from the canteen. Each time that Winston broke off for one of his spells of sleep, he tried to leave his desk clear of work, and each time that he crawled back, sticky-eyed and aching, it was to find that another shower of paper cylinders had covered his desk like a snowdrift, half burying the speakwrite and overflowing onto the floor, so that the first job was always to stack them into a neat enough pile to give him room to work. What was worst of all was that the work was by no means purely mechanical. Often it was not merely enough to substitute one name for another, but any detailed report of events demanded care and imagination. Even the geographical knowledge that one needed in transferring the war from one part of the world to another part was considerable. So they get it done in like a week. And it was a mighty deed which could not be mentioned, had been achieved. It was now impossible for any human being to prove by documentary evidence that the war with Eurasia had ever happened. During this time, he had gotten a delivery of the book from O'Brien, and it was in this like briefcase, and he ends up bringing it home, and he finally opens it up. And the rest of this chapter, and I believe one of the next ones, there's these incredibly long excerpts from this book talking about, again, this like history and progression of the current political landscape and the totalitarianism that's happening and stuff. So I'm going to read you this first little paragraph of it because it's fascinating, and this is the first paragraph that Winston reads before breaking off. So, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism by Book of Goldstein. Winston began reading. Chapter 1. Ignorance is strength. Throughout recorded time, and probably since the end of the Neolithic Age, there have been 3 kinds of people in the world: the high, the middle, and the low. They have been subdivided in many ways. They have borne countless different names, and their relative numbers, as well as their attitude towards one another, have varied from age to age, but the essential structure of society has never altered. Even after enormous upheavals and seemingly irrevocable changes, the same pattern has always reasserted itself, just as a gyroscope will always return to equilibrium, however far it is pushed from one way or the other. The aim of these groups are entirely irreconcilable. And then it cuts off. When he picks it up later, he's in like chapter 3 of the book that's talking about the war is peace terminology, which is like one of the tenets, right? You have like the ignorance is strength, freedom is slavery, and war is peace thing. Slavery is peace? Peace is slavery. You understand what I'm saying. Whatever the like tenets are of this. And this one is in this middle of this like really, really long explanation about war and how they have always gone at war. Because when war becomes literally continuous, it also ceases to be dangerous. When war is continuous, there is no such thing as military necessity. Technical progress can cease, and the most palpable facts can be denied or disregarded. As we have seen, researchers that could be called scientific are still carried out for the purposes of war, but they are essentially a kind of daydreaming, and their failure to show results is not important. Efficiency, even military efficiency, is no longer needed. Nothing is efficient in Oceania except the thought police. Since each of the three superstates is unconquerable, each is in effect a separate universe within which almost any perversion of thought can be safely practiced. Reality only exerts its pressure through the needs of everyday life, the need to eat and drink, to get shelter and clothing, to avoid swallowing poison or stepping out of a top-story windows, and the like. Between life and death, and between physical pleasure and physical pain, there is still a distinction, but that is all. Cut off from contact to the outer world, and with the past, the citizen of Oceania is like a man in interstellar space, who has no way of knowing which direction is up and which direction is down. The rulers of such a state are absolute, as the pharaohs or the Caesars could not be. They are obliged to prevent their followers from starving to death in numbers large enough to be inconvenient, and they are obliged to remain the same low level of military technique as their rivals. But once that minimum is achieved, they can twist reality into whatever shape they choose. And so they keep everybody they keep this like war going to maintain the actuality of not having to improve living conditions, because you can make everybody work longer to support the war efforts. You can give reasoning to like decrease rations if you're supporting the war effort, and you can like do all of this stuff because we're at war, and so like anything can happen. You can distract people. And if people are living in constant fear of their houses being bombed, then you also have a lot of control in them in that way as well. If you don't have like the security of having food on the table and living your life happily and finding peace and relationships and building these bonds with the people around you and feeling, safe in your own country or safe in your own home, you completely eliminate the idea of people to, again, think for themselves or think critically or against, or like think about their situations long enough to get like a bad feeling about something or like a negative thought, especially if you have TV screens in their rooms or in their houses screaming at them all the time. You also prevent thought in that way. And so you get people in enough of this like, well, I just got to do what I can do to survive. And then they change history and do everything else to, make it work for them as the party. So this, although the vast majority of party members understand it only in a shallower sense, the inner meaning of the party slogan, war is peace, because you keep all of these people busy enough to not question what the party is doing, and you keep the people busy enough to do whatever it is that you want them to do, while you're keeping them distracted, essentially, while the party can do whatever it wants to do. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the following chapters. And when Julia comes over and he's telling her about what he has read. Again, they're in the little apartment thing. The little apartment thing, right? So they're not being watched inside of their house. He's telling her all of these things from this book of Goldstein's. And he brings up this idea. And he's asking her if she remembers this bird that sang to them in the woods, like the first time that they had met up. She says he wasn't singing to us. He was singing to please himself. Not even that. He was just singing. The bird sang. The proles sang, because they're listening to people singing outside. That's where this is like coming from as well. The party did not sing. All around the world, in London, New York, Africa, and Brazil, and in the mysterious forbidden lands beyond the frontiers, in the streets of Paris and Berlin, in the villages of the endless Russian plain, in the bazaars of China and Japan, everywhere stood the same solid, unconquerable figure, made monstrous by work and childbearing, toiling from birth to death, and still singing. Out of those mighty loins, a race of conscious beings must one day come. You were the dead, theirs was the future. But you could share in that future if you kept alive in mind as they kept alive the body, and passed on the secret doctrine that 2 + 2 make 4. We are dead, he said. We are dead, echoed Julia dutifully. You are dead, said an iron voice behind them. And, they have been found out because the shop owner was actually a member of the thought police. He sold him out, obviously. And that's the end of part 2, is they get collected and rounded up by the thought police, and they get taken to presumably the Ministry of Love. But obviously there's really no way of making certain. He just like wakes up in this like really, really dingy cell. And he is obviously terrified, because it's like there's regular criminals in there, which are fine because they're just doing regular stuff, like whatever, you'll just, repent for your sins or something and face your punishment. But the idea of being at the Ministry of Love for committing a thought crime or like an anti-party crime, the inevitability is that you are going to be tortured into confessing all of your crimes. And so I'm going to be skipping a lot of part 3 because a lot of it is actually just talking about torture and like really these terrible experiences that Winston is about to go through. So I'm just giving you a heads up about that piece of it. Yeah. Also in there in the jail cell thing with him is his neighbor, like the one with those crazy kids that I talked about way earlier, that the kids were like training to be spies. I guess the dad had said in his sleep some anti-party thing, and so he's there. But that's different because he did that while he was sleeping, and you can repent for that and it'll be like, you know, okay, you'll just like, again, do whatever you have to do to get back into good graces, and it won't be the same experience as Winston's. So he's just sitting here, just dreading, just absolutely dreading what his future will be. In chapter 2, he's taken away out of the holding cell and he's taken into like a room to be tortured. And it's by O'Brien, because O'Brien was also in on all of this. He has been watching him for 7 years. And the turning point has come. I shall save you. I shall make you perfect. And as he's going through like all of these tactics to get Winston to confess to all of his like thought crimes, he's also talking to Winston through all of this, saying that you know perfectly well what's the matter with you. You've known it for years, though you have fought against the knowledge. You are mentally deranged. You suffer from a defective memory. You are unable to remember real events, and you persuade yourself that you remember other events which never happened. Fortunately, it is curable. You have never cured yourself of it because you did not choose to. There was a small effort of the will that you were not ready to make. Even now, I am well aware you are clinging to your disease under the impression that it is a virtue. Now we will take an example. At this moment, which power is Oceania at war with? So he, answers it. It says the truth a couple of times, and then he obviously gets harmed in such a way that then he, confesses what O'Brien wants to hear. And O'Brien says, do not imagine that you will save yourself, Winston. However completely you surrender to us, no one has once gone astray is ever spared. And even if we choose to let you live out the natural term of your life, still you would never escape from us. What happens to you here is forever. Understand that in advance. We shall crush you down to the point from which there is no coming back. Things will happen to you which you could not recover if you lived 1,000 years. Never again will you be capable of ordinary human feelings. Everything will be dead inside of you. Never again will you be capable of love or friendship or joy of living or laughter or curiosity or courage or integrity. You will be hollow. We shall squeeze you empty, and then we shall fill you up with ourselves. And it gets to the point, which is like so incredibly, this is such a screwed up idea, where it is so hurtful and harmful, and the pain that he is like enduring is so great that he starts to view O'Brien as a savior for ending the pain rather than, the one who is like inducing the pain. And I don't know why the idea, that sentence just like really like messed me up so bad. And at the very end, there was like made reference kind of throughout this like session about room 101. So he asks at the very end, he asks O'Brien, like, what is room 101? And O'Brien says, you know exactly what that is. You know exactly what that is. Uh-oh. And so in chapter 3, they continue this discussion in this session and whatnot. And they talk a little bit, I don't want to say the term philosophically, but more generally. So now that Winston has confessed to his crimes and he's starting to come around as well, he's trying to understand now the why the party is the way that it is, and O'Brien is pretty open about what it is. But he asks him, he says, well, so why do you think against the lunatic is more intelligent than yourself? Who gives your arguments a fair hearing than simply persists in his lunacy? And Winston says, you're ruling over us for our own good. You believe that human beings are not fit to govern themselves, and therefore he started and almost cried out. A pang of pain shot through his body. O'Brien had pushed the lever of the dial up to 35. That was stupid, Winston. Stupid. You should know better than to say anything like that. He pulled the lever back and continued. Now I will tell you the answer to my question, which is why do you think that we do what we do? Why do you think the party is the way that it is? It is this. The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in power, not wealth or luxury or long life or happiness, only power, pure power. What pure power means, you will understand presently. We are different from the oligarchs of the past, in that we know what we are doing. All the others, even those who resembled ourselves, were cowards and hypocrites. The German Nazis and the Russian communists came very close to us in their methods, but they never had the courage to recognize their own motives. They pretended, perhaps, they even believed that they had seized power unwillingly for a limited time, and that just around the corner there lay a paradise where human beings would be free and equal. We are not like that. We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power. Now do you understand me? And Winston pushes back and he's like, you guys can't control everything. Like there's sciences, there's climate, the gravity and disease and pain and death. There's things that you cannot control. Like the world itself is only a speck of dust and man is tiny and helpless. How long has he been in existence? For millions of years, the earth was uninhabited. And O'Brien says, nonsense. The earth is as old as we are, no older. How could it be older? Nothing exists except through human consciousness. But the rocks, and Winston argues, but the rocks are full of bones of extinct animals, mammoths, mastodons, and enormous reptiles which lived here long before man ever heard of. O'Brien says, have you ever seen those bones, Winston? Of course not. 19th century biologists invented them. Before man, there was nothing. After man, if he could come to an end, there would be nothing outside man. There is nothing. But the whole universe is outside of us. Look at the stars. Some of them are a million light years away. They reach out forever. Winston counters, and O'Brien says indifferently, what are the stars? They're bits of fire a few kilometers away. We could reach them if we wanted to, or we could blot them out. The earth is the center of the universe. The sun and the stars go around it. Jesus Christ. And so then he asks another question to Winston, and he says, how does one man assert his power over another? Winston says, by making him suffer. Exactly. By making him suffer, obedience is not enough. Unless he is suffering, how can you be sure he is obeying your will and not his own? Power is in inflicting pain and humiliation. Power is in tearing human minds to pieces and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing. Do you begin to see, then, what kind of world we are creating? It is the exact opposite of the stupid hedonistic utopias that the old reformers imagined. A world of fear and treachery and torment, a world of trampling and being trampled upon, a world which will grow not less, but more merciless as it refines itself. Progress in our world will be progress towards more pain. The old civilizations claimed that they were founded on love or justice. Ours is founded upon hatred. In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. Everything else we shall destroy. Everything. Already we are breaking down the habits of thought which have survived from before the revolution. We have cut the links between child and parent, and between man, and between man and woman. No one dares trust a wife or a child or a friend any longer. But in the future, there will be no wives and no friends. Children will be taken from their mothers at birth as one takes eggs from a hen. The sex instinct will be eradicated. Procreation will be an annual formality like the renewal of a ration card. We shall abolish the orgasm. Our neurologists are at work upon it now. There will be no loyalty except loyalty toward the party. There will be no love except the love of Big Brother. There will be no laughter except the laugh of triumph over a defeated enemy. There will be no art, no literature, no science. When we are omnipotent, we shall have no more need for science. There will be no distinction between beauty and ugliness. There will be no curiosity, no enjoyment of the process of life. All competing pleasures will be destroyed. But always, do not forget this, Winston, always there will be the intoxication of power, constantly increasing and constantly growing subtler. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face. forever. It's impossible to found a civilization on fear and hatred and cruelty. It would never endure. Why do you think that, Winston? It would have no vitality. It would disintegrate. It would commit suicide. He says, nonsense. You are under the impression that hatred is more exhausting than love. Why should it be? And if it were, what difference would that make? Suppose that we chose to wear ourselves out faster. Suppose that we quicken the tempo of human life till men are senile at 30. Still, what difference would it make? Can you not understand that the death of the individual is not death? The party is immortal. We control life, Winston, at all its levels. You are imagining that there is something called human nature which will be outraged by what we do and will turn against us, but we create human nature. Men are infinitely malleable. Or perhaps you have returned to your old idea that the proletarians or the slaves will arise and overthrow us. Put it out of your mind. They are helpless like the animals. Humanity is the party. The others are outside, irrelevant. So he ends up having this whole thing where he's like, do you not believe that, Winston? You believe in humanity? You believe you're the last man on earth and that you're the representation of trying to save everybody? And so O'Brien makes Winston look in the mirror and strip naked and look at his body. And he's hunched over and old and he's dirty and he's unshaven and grungy and he has all these ulcers and wounds and just not looking hot. You know what I mean? And so O'Brien's like, so you think this is humanity? You think you're the one that's going to save mankind? You? A little bit more back and forth, a little bit more whatever. Winston accepts his death and he says, just tell me how soon until they shoot me. And O'Brien says, it might be a long time. You're a difficult case, but don't give up hope. Everyone is cured sooner or later. And in the end, we shall shoot you. In chapter 4, it's an undetermined amount of time later, but he's still imprisoned. He's at least outside of this initial torture thing, and he's accepted, these teachings and whatnot. And just kind of going about life, just living in prison. He's constantly writing the tenets of the party, the whole freedom is slavery, and he says 2 + 2 make 5, and he's repeatedly trying to get all of this, trying to train his brain into thinking differently. And unfortunately for him, he ends up having a dream and he wakes up calling Julia's name. And so he realizes that it's going to be a matter of time until they show up and harm him for doing this. And it doesn't take very long for O'Brien to show up. He says, you're improving. Intellectually, there's very little wrong with you. It is only emotionally that you have failed to make progress. Tell me, Winston, and remember no lies. You know that I'm always able to detect a lie. Tell me, what are your true feelings toward Big Brother? Winston says, I hate him. You hate him? Good. Then the time has come for you to take the last step. You must love Big Brother. It is not enough to obey him. You must love him. He pushes Winston out of the cell and he says, room 101. And the guards take him there. And in chapter 5, room 101 is the ultimate chamber to get harmed until you confess to everything and until you change. O'Brien says it is the worst thing in the world that we'll use against you for this this change in you. The worst thing in the world varies from individual to individual. It may be burial alive, or death by fire, or drowning, or impalement, or 50 other deaths. There are cases where it is sometimes a quite trivial thing, not even fatal. By itself, pain is not always enough. There are occasions when a human being will stand out against the pain, even to the point of death. But for everyone, there is something unendurable, something that cannot be contemplated. Courage and cowardice are not involved. If you are falling from a height, it is not cowardly to clutch a rope. If you have come up from deep water, it is not cowardly to fill your lungs with air. It is merely an instinct which cannot be destroyed. It is the same with the rats. For you, they are unendurable. They are a form of pressure that you cannot withstand even if you wished to. You will do what is required of you. And so they put him in this thing where his head is in this contraption, and they're going to unleash rats upon his face. And there's 2 doors to get to him. So they put this stuff here, and then he hears the first door open. So in theory, the rats are now a couple inches closer to his face, and there's only this one piece of metal that is separating him from his phobia of these rats. Before this door opens, he starts screaming out Julia's name and says to put her here. Do it to Julia, not me. Do it to Julia. I don't care what you do to her. Tear her face off, strip her to the bones, not me. Julia, 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 not me. And with that, we go to chapter 6, the very final chapter of the book. An unspecified amount of time has passed, and Winston is just going on about life. He's back to work, he's just doing his own thing, and these days he could never fix his mind on any one subject for more than a few moments at a time. Almost unconsciously, he traced his finger in the dust in the table. 2 + 2 = 5. And then his mind wanders a little bit more, and he's thinking, they can't get inside you, she had said, but they could get inside you. For whatever happens to you here is forever, O'Brien had said, and that was a true word. There were things, your own acts, from which you could never recover. Something was killed in your breast, burnt out, cauterized. He had seen her. He had even spoken to her. There was no danger in it. He knew as though instinctively that they now took almost no interest in his doings. He's ran into Julia outside of prison, and he knows that like the thought police and the Big Brother or whoever in general is like not really watching him anymore because they know that they have broken him in such a way that like he's not a concern of the party. And so he runs into her yet again at this like little park thing, and she says, I betrayed you. He says, I betrayed you as well. She gave him another quick look of dislike. Sometimes they threaten you with something you can't stand up to, can't even think about. And then you say, don't do it to me, do it to somebody else, do it to so-and-so. And perhaps you might pretend afterwards that it was only a trick and that you just said it to make them stop and didn't really mean it, but that isn't true. At the time when it happens, you do mean it. You think there's no other way of saving yourself, and you're quite ready to save yourself that way. You want it to happen to the other person. You don't give a damn what they suffer. All you care about is yourself. After that, you don't feel the same towards the other person any longer. He agrees, and they talk about maybe meeting up again at some later date, and Winston just kind of like, again, going on about life. Just going through the motions as this like empty shell of a person that he is now. He's like also thinking about how he's just like waiting for the day that he's gonna like get shot in the back of the head pretty much. He gazed up at the enormous face. 40 years it had taken him to learn what kind of smile was hidden beneath the dark mustache. Oh, cruel, needless misunderstanding. Oh, stubborn, self-willed exile from the loving breast. 2 gin-scented tears trickled down the sides of his nose. But it was all right. Everything was all right. The struggle was finished. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. He gave in. His mind got broken so bad. He loves Big Brother, and that's really sad. What a terrible book. What a terrible book. Like, it's just depressing. It's not, like, obviously it's not bad in, like, that sense. It's just bad in the sense of, like, holy frick, it's just so heavy. And like I said, I think a lot of it is just relevant to today. A lot of it is just a lot of food for thought that I could sit here and like unpack and talk about for like literally hours. I do encourage, right, some discussion in the comments, or talking about this in a book club if you have one, or reading it for yourself and, you know, again, drawing your own conclusions and comparisons, and, you know, thinking about maybe how it relates to things that you have seen in the news cycle or what you've heard of in general from people. I don't know. Just it's some food for thought. It's definitely food for thought that I highly, highly encourage. And I can't wait to read Animal Farm. I really did like George Orwell's writing just in general. I thought it was fascinating. Like I said, beyond the maybe not accuracy or whatever, the relevancy, but just in general, I thought it was very interestingly written and stuff. So I'm excited to read his other, I have a couple other, I think Coming Up for Air, is that by him? Maybe, it might be by somebody else. I'm pretty sure I have like 2 or 3 other books by him as well that I'm like more curious than ever to read. I'm so excited. I get to check this off my list. What a great book to have marked on my little classics list. Thank you so much for hanging out and listening. I hope you enjoyed this little experience. Like I said, comment down below. I have a running list of books that I'm going to cover for this series, so have that to look forward to. I think the next ones, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's a bunch. Obviously, I'm not ever going to stop this particular series. This is my passion project for sure. This is like one of my favorite things that I do on this channel. Even though these videos objectively like don't perform well, it's just, I like it. Anyway, thank you again. I appreciate you, especially if you made it to the very end of this video. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.